Hello everyone. Today's topic is not just intriguing, but also incredibly important for anyone who cares about the future of the U.S. economy and the global financial system. We're talking about the potential collapse of the U.S. dollar and the looming threat of hyperinflation, as tackled by Shanmuganathan N in his book, RIP USD 1971-202X, and the Way Forward. Now, I know what you're thinking. Isn't this a bit alarmist? The US dollar has been the world's reserve currency for decades. How could it possibly collapse? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. We'll be drawing from Shanmuganathan's book, which argues that we're on the precipice of a major economic shift, one that could lead to a situation similar to the hyperinflation of the German Papiermark in the early 1920s. So buckle up, because this is going to be a wild ride through history, economics, and a bit of prophecy. This is not just about numbers and charts. It's about the future of our livelihoods, our savings, and our way of life. The book paints a picture of a future where the US dollar loses its purchasing power at an alarming rate. Shanmuganathan argues that while hyperinflation isn't a certainty, it's a very real possibility, perhaps even a probable outcome for this decade. To understand why, let's take a step back and look at some historical data. The book provides a chart showing the rapid devaluation of the German Papiermark from 1919 to 1923. In January 1919, it took 170 Papiermarks to buy 1 ounce of gold. By September 1923, that number had skyrocketed to a staggering 87 trillion Papiermarks. Imagine that. A currency that was once relatively stable became virtually worthless in just a few years. The author draws a comparison between this historical event and the current state of the US dollar. He argues that the US dollar, like the Papiermark, is a fiat currency, meaning it's not backed by a tangible asset like gold. Historically, no fiat currency has survived more than a few decades. Shanmuganathan suggests that if we extend the timeline, the probability of hyperinflation in the US dollar is nearly 100% by the end of the century. But even in the short term, he believes we're heading for a period of high inflation, if not hyperinflation. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of why this might happen, let's talk about the economic depression that Shanmuganathan believes is already on the horizon. While there's no standard definition for a depression, the author defines it as a period of prolonged economic contraction, lasting a few years, with a real cumulative GDP contraction of more than 10%. To put this in perspective, the Great Depression lasted from 1929 to 1939, or arguably until 1946, if we consider the impact of World War II on the economy. The author argues that the upcoming depression will be different from the Great Depression in one crucial way. It will be highly inflationary, whereas the Great Depression was deflationary. This means the US dollar could lose a substantial portion of its value, not just against gold, but against other currencies as well. Shanmuganathan uses the dollar index, DXY, to illustrate the potential for the US dollar's decline. The DXY measures the value of the US dollar relative to a basket of currencies from the US's significant trading partners. Despite the DXY being near a 20-year high, the author argues that this doesn't mean the dollar is safe. He suggests that the DXY could lose 50% or even 90% of its value when the crisis unfolds. The author describes the U.S. economy as being in a state of unstable equilibrium, suggesting that a small push could send it into an economic depression. He attributes this instability to massive monetary inflation, or what is commonly referred to as economic stimulus. The author argues that without these measures, the U.S. would already be in a deep recession. To understand the structural issues underlying the U.S. economy, Shanmuganathan takes us through the history of money, starting with the U.S. dropping the gold standard in 1971. This was when the U.S. Federal Reserve went off the gold standard, meaning the US dollar was no longer redeemable for gold at a fixed rate. The author argues that this was a significant turning point, setting the stage for the current monetary system. The author also discusses the ban on private ownership of gold in 1933, the formation of the U.S. Federal Reserve in 1913, and the evolution of money from barter to transactions using gold and silver. He emphasizes the importance of understanding the difference between the gold standard and unbacked paper currency, arguing that the latter is a regressive step that will cause significant harm to the world economy. Shanmuganathan introduces the concept of the D3C2 properties of money: desirable, durable, divisible, convenient, and consistent. Gold and silver are the only commodities that satisfy all these criteria, making them the ideal form of money. In contrast, he argues that Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies lack the fundamental properties of money and are merely speculative assets. The author makes a compelling case for a return to some form of the gold standard, arguing that this is the only way to prevent the looming economic crisis. He suggests that the resolution to the crisis must come through a return to sound money, defined as a gold-backed U.S. dollar with a dramatically downsized U.S. government. Shanmuganathan criticizes the role of central banks, particularly the Federal Reserve, in creating and perpetuating the current monetary system. The Federal Reserve's policies have led to excessive debt, monetary inflation, and the erosion of the U.S. dollar's value. He believes that the Federal Reserve's actions have been driven by a flawed understanding of economics, particularly the concept of neutrality of money and the Cantillon effect. Shanmuganathan explains the Cantillon effect, which describes how monetary inflation affects different parts of the economy unevenly. He writes that this effect has led to greater wealth and income inequality, benefiting those closest to the source of new money, e.g., banks and financial institutions, while disadvantaging those further away, e.g., ordinary citizens. He suggests that the U.S. dollar's status as the world's reserve currency is under threat. America's declining economic dominance, coupled with the growing influence of China and other countries, makes the current monetary system unsustainable. Shanmuganathan proposes that the most likely alternative to the U.S. dollar is a gold-backed currency, possibly the emerging BRICS gold standard. The author concludes by calling for radical changes to revive the U.S. dollar and restore the U.S. economy, advocating for a return to the founding principles of limited government and sound money. He also suggests abolishing the Federal Reserve, implementing a gold-backed currency, and balancing the budget to prevent further economic decline. And there you have it, folks. A deep dive into the potential collapse of the U.S. dollar and the case for a return to the gold standard. It's a lot to take in, I know. But the key takeaway is this: the current monetary system is unsustainable, and the longer we wait to address these issues, the more painful the eventual correction will be. This has been a BrightLearn video from BrightLearn.ai on the book USD 1971-202X and the Way Forward by Shanmuganathan N. Visit BrightLearn.ai for more fascinating videos like this one, and visit naturalnews.com for full editorial coverage and breaking news on critical stories that keep you informed and aware of what's really going on.